Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Galactic Interversal Consortium. Today's episode is being recorded on 11/16/25. This is going to be a very controversial topic, folks. So no hate mail, please, on this one. We were going to make this our Christmas episode, but due to blowback a little bit from this and pre-blowback, we decided to just randomize it at this point. This is now where I open this circle to true benevolence with no conflicting agendas as of this moment in time. So, Joanna?
We are all one, and when one is harmed, all are harmed. When one is helped, all are helped. Therefore, in the name of who I am, and I am one with all there is, that only the highest good be done. We pray for you, your friends, your family, your loved ones, to let healing energies in. Let them love you, let them nourish you, and let them bring you to your highest good. We pray for ourselves, our friends, our family, our loved ones, to also let healing energies in, to let them love us and nourish us and bring us to our highest good. We ask for benevolence now to come in with no conflicting agenda so that we may have this conversation in great understanding. And we ask for malevolent or mischievous type beings to be swept away so that we may have this conversation in peace. That and with great blessings that we always send your way, we say so be it.
And so be it.
So be it.
So this conversation today is going to kind of, we really enjoy speaking about galactic history. We really enjoy speaking about the what ifs and trying to channel in, who was a part of this great seeding? Were the races really something that happened from walking around the earth and just being in a different place? Or potentially could it be something greater? When we talk about the great seeding, of course, we talk about the great possibility that there were obviously humans surfing, the introverse, the multiverse, and everything existed way back when, and people coming and actually seeding themselves and their races onto this planet. And so we've enjoyed trying to have that conversation to give people more food for thoughts that would actually go along with some of the archaeology out there as to why are these huge structures in place? Why can't we recreate them now? And when it comes to things like Cahokia mounds, why do none of the skeletons of regular people have back problems from building such great structures? So this is an interest of ours to have these conversations. Today's conversation revolves more about the concept of spiritual religious belief systems that have come into being into our world. And there have been some who have looked back even to ancient teachings, those writings and different things that talk about the Anunnaki. Again, some of those beings before humanity, who they were and what they were, and if they came down upon to this plane, what did they do and how did they immerse themselves within humanity, and what did they use humanity for and how did they use humanity? One of the great conversations that's going on all over the place right now is the concept of these Anunnaki, truly of the Sumerian text, truly being real beings that were here, and how they actually involved themselves and became the gods, basically, to some humans and to certain groups of people throughout time. And so it's interesting if you read some of the Sumerian texts and different things that are going on, you also see some of those same stories bleeding into other conversations and mythologies, as well as into some of now the belief systems of religious context, in order to say that maybe some of those gods that some of these people are praying to are actually some of these Anunnakis. And some of them are good, some of them not so good. I know if we look at different faiths around the world, they're flat out going to tell you they have different gods with different demeanors and what do they want and what do they expect from humans. We know some of that God worship throughout time in different areas, including the Mayan culture, were led to blood sacrifices and things that happen in order to please the gods. So believe it or not, there's been some very interesting information to say maybe some of this happened within the Christian faith as well. And so today we just want to have a discussion of all kinds of things that, are related to this. And could there be some of that coming into even the Christian type of faith, as it seems, through other faiths as well. And so we hope you will just listen with an open ear and open heart. Again, kind of in the what if, something to think about later. And so today we're going to discuss that within this context. Now, a lot of times when we talk about the Anunnaki and the gods, we talk about the two brothers, and one of them was kind of okay. Both of them lost their minds for a while. One of them was turned out to be okay, and one of them really, and I hate to say it, his spouse went to the dark side, and it seemed to want to become the epitome of more of domination, control, and a lot of negative type of things. And what if that actually found its way into a lot of the religions that are talked about now? Some of, again, the practices that are occurring behind the scenes with some of these faiths, and even potentially blood sacrifices that are still occurring. So this is why this is such a controversial topic. We just want to have it so that we can give people something to think about. Archaeology and findings will be involved in this as well. And so that's really the premise of what we're doing today. So Bjorn, I think you kind of maybe wanted to take it from here and have
Yeah.
something about it.
Well, I just wanted to add that, ultimately on GIC, our mission statement is to uh, communicate with the consortium and find truthful information, and then and ultimately share that with what we received from the benevolent beings, to give on the show, to anyone that's open to receive it. So we're always looking for the truth, and we are struggling to do our best to ensure we're getting truthful information. So we focus on the beings that have been truthful. We found information that really resonates with us. And we, on this subject, we've actually been talking about this for almost 2 years, and we've haven't really had a show specifically about some of this focus around religion, because we have, I guess a couple of years ago, we ran into a bit of information about Jesus and that period in the Bible, and ultimately it brought into the question. I think a lot of people actually question and think about, like, where did the Bible come from? Ultimately, how was it put together, and how was it translated from different languages? And ultimately, when you start going down that rabbit hole, you realize that the New Testament has been rewritten, the King James version. There's the Old Testament, and when you actually, it's always thought that it was originally Hebrew, but if you actually trace it back, the original texts, and the oldest texts are written in Greek, in something called the Septuagint, and that's where it gets interesting, because the Greek, a lot of intelligent, smart scientists have also come from the Greeks. Um, you have uh, ultimately you have somebody like Galen as an example, where he was a physician, worked for Marcus Aurelius, and wrote about 22,000 pages of specific medical texts. And those medical texts have only about 10% of them have been translated. And there's so much information in the pharmaceutical world that is just untouched in that area. And you kind of question why we've lost so much around that knowledge at the time. And the Greek vocabulary had, any around 500,000 words, which is crazy when you think about it, because we have a lot more words in English now, but around the 16th century, where some of this stuff was translated, there was only about 60,000 words. And there's there's even less ultimately used in the King James version of words to use to translate it. So you know that there's some mistranslation. And so ultimately there's some question around what this translation ultimately means. And so there is there's some ultimately people who are, looking at that are classicists, looking at that Greek language and understanding more today that there is a bit of a mistranslation happening. So it brings up the question, what is the truth? And ultimately, hopefully we can discover more about that today, because I think it goes deeper than we understand, and hopefully we can get some answers.
I find it quite interesting. I was looking this up ahead of time, and trying to find exact definitions of certain words like pharmakeia in Greek, basically got translated to, it was in the Bible. Pharmakeia, pharmaceuticals, is a Greek word often translated as sorcery or witchcraft or magic, which I found actually fascinating. And then it refers to the use of drugs, potions, and spells or magic for ideological tracivist purposes. I cannot pronounce that word. Oh my God. Okay, you can tell I'm already being screwed with. Now, what I find interesting was over the years, the word Christ, people say like the Christ, actually was the Greek word for drugs. But I want to tell somebody something that I discovered as of this morning, and this does not necessarily surprise me any. The word pharmakeia occurs, I told you what that meant. The word Christ was always associated with it. Guess what? It has actually completely been scrubbed from the internet. And this is what I found very interesting. I looked for Christ meaning in Greek, and I used several search engines when I did this to make sure that it just wasn't Google scrubbing it. And the word basically tried to switch it to Christ, but then I switched it back to Christ, and it comes from the Greek word Christos, means anointed one or Messiah. So it's now associating it purely with the story of Jesus, and is not associating it with Pharmakeia. And I find this very interesting because even back in the 90s, when this idea first popped up, there was a show on that Roddenberry created called Earth Final Conflict that showed the aliens looshing people through a substance called Chris. And it sounded like you'd set it through like a reptilian's point of view, like with a hiss and with a K and a double S at the end. Instead of Christ, it was Kryss. So he was trying to say these two things were associated. You cannot find anywhere uh, the association to the Christ and to Pharmakeia. And like I said, this does not surprise me any that this has been scrubbed, that people are focusing morely on the religious version of the figure versus what went on. And also, you and me, Bjorn, actually looked into this. And there's other people that I've spoken to that have looked into this and saw that at the time of the supposed crucifixion, within that time frame, I was seeing we were seeing all the like basically it was basically child trafficking. And what was going on was the even the senators were involved in this, and the emperor was involved in this, where they would all draw lots as to which child got basically adrenochromed. If you take the formula for adrenochrome, and this is adrenalized or oxidized adrenaline, this also is said to cause euphoric and also extreme connection to spirit type of connection. It's kind of like an ayahuasca type of effect. Now we know this is a more of a vampiric type of thing now with the whole Hollywood association. But what I will say is during that time, this is what was going on. This is what was being manufactured. That's what the Christ actually is, and evolved in sorcery, magic, alchemy. So the Christian definition isn't too wrong with dark alchemy and dark sorcery. So anything that Christians tend to be dark in the witchcraft area, but I'm just saying not to be an ass in that area. Now, how is this associated with the Jesus story? And Ryan, we'll get your perspective here in a second, but there was one thing I wanted to actually bring up. I know this isn't necessarily a basis for scientific investigation, but I connect the things that I personally have experienced around this. For years, we used to connect to Jesus. After finding out he was Enlil, we stopped doing this. Now, was there a figure that I could clearly see looking back in that time frame that was associated with the start of the Christian religion? Yes. But was it exactly the same? No. Again, this had to do with trafficking of adults and trafficking of children. This was also a false figurehead that was created in order to give a religion a face. I have a past life memory where I was the son of Nicodemus, where I was a Roman centurion, a guard that went around with this guy as he went around planning with a couple of other guys, which I thought were Peter and Paul, but they weren't. Went around two other adults, and they were planning how they would plant the seeds of this religion. This guy was a Roman that was working on the behest of the emperor at the time and trying to plan out this religion. And what the whole thing was is they were also trying to subvert the eyes away from the trafficking that was going on, the horrors of the empire. They did this later on in the Roman Empire with the gladiatorial games to make sure that it was a distraction against the problems of the empire. This was no different back in that time frame. So, what I find well, I shouldn't say interesting, but I saw that this person he had the ability to channel in Enlil's energy. So you could say Saturn or Enlil was the one responsible for creating this as well. And eventually, later on in time, Christianity was ratified or more solidified by the Council of Nicaea later on in history in Turkey, but it was much later in history. But this specific event, they wanted to eventually discard the actor they used, so they were originally going to kill him. And I remember seeing this person running away from the scene, and eventually he was found and killed. But what happened was the rest of it later on in history, they made up to associate with a religion. And one point I will make is the phrase, giveth unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, giveth unto God what belongs to God. And I was even having this discussion with my mother just 2 days ago as well. The whole story comes from the whole Jesus by the well story, where two guys walk up to a well and throw a couple coins in the well, and like to get a wish from the well. Then a woman comes in, throws in all her money, and then Jesus goes, "Oh, she has the right idea." This was propaganda put out there by the Roman Empire to get you to giveth unto Caesar the taxes, and also saying, "Oh, you'll be poor and be happy." That's the new phrase. These are the scams that go across time. Also, the demigod worship that goes across time and links to Hollywood. So you see the associations here from the modern Adrenochrome scandal to the ancient past. So this is what I wanted to put out there before we went forward. So Ryan, if you could, I know you had some really great historical information on the birth of Jesus time frame. Why don't you go ahead and tell people?
Okay. To start, I'll go into, I guess, the initial stuff is that, geez, the way the time frame, a lot of people think AD means after death. It actually means Anno Domini, so it's the first, there's not like a 30-year gap when Jesus is alive of our calendar. It just means basically the celebration after birth. A lot of people mix that up and think that for some reason we don't record 30 years of time. That's not true. Um, the so he would have been born in 1 BC, sometime in either the spring or fall, because shepherds don't tend flocks in the dead of winter. In the ancient world, you would have viewed like the time we're in now as the beginning of winter, because winter officially started in the ancient world at the end of the harvest season, which we view as like Halloween. It would then go till about February or mid-February at the latest. And that's when you'd have Celtic festivals like it's they have like a spring festival. I forget the name of it off the top of my head. And the Romans and the Greeks, they all had festivals like that as well. Jesus would have been born in 1 BC, either in the spring or the fall, when shepherds would have been moving flocks between grazing areas for the uh, to prepare them either to go to summer for pasturage or to return to where they're kept for the winter, and so they could be slaughtered. So we know that he was born then. At the time, Augustus had just sort of reorganized Rome from its Republican era into what we now view as like the empire. It would have been seen as an empire before that, but the political system is what we talk about with the reorganization, where there's sort of one guy. The Romans were always paranoid about using the word king after their ancient abuse at the hands of kings. So the word Rex, like we use for Tyrannosaurus Rex, which means tyrant lizard king, was like a banned word in Rome. You could not say Rex. So he would use Augustus, which just means first citizen. Um, and he became Kaiser Augustus, which because his family name was Kaiser, because he was the adopted son of Caesar, even though he's his grandnephew. And he basically played the political game and had no rivals, and so basically everyone was in his pocket. So what he wanted was done, and that's how the basic office of the emperors came into like being. Jesus would have been born in the latter portions of his reign, and the tax that they were headed to give was directly that's talked about in the Bible. It would be for the imperial coffers, and that money would have then went to Rome and then been redistributed out to local governments in the provinces and to the military for manning of border forts and whatnot. So we're talking later in Augustus's reign. He has already had the tragedy of the Teutoburg Forest, where he kind of lost his mind for a bit. And we're about 30 years before the destruction of Pompeii in like what, if people are interested in archaeology, that's like a good time frame to think about. So we're about when Jesus dies, we're about 30 years before that. So it's the first 30 years. And really, the stories in the Bible only kind of are about a 10-year period, which we would have had in like the 20s AD, because for his childhood, he was just a fairly unassuming Jewish child in Judea, which was the Roman province where that is like today Israel, Palestine, and Syria. His To talk now about the sort of linguistics stuff that was brought up before. We know that Hippocrates of the Hippocratic Oath name is where like the Pharmakeia stuff comes from. And and in the ancient world, medicine was considered a form of sort of witchcraft, especially if you're like Hippocrates, who was not tying it in with ancient world religion, and in fact kind of spit on religion and like you should pray for your healings. He realized you didn't need that, and that's kind of where the beginning of like a division of praying for healing and like medical scientific healing begins. And then now to go into the Bible collating. The Bible's a compendium of stories, and the New Testament was written up about 400 years after the events of Jesus from various writings, some of them which would have gone back to the apostles, but would have undoubtedly changed over that period. The idea that the Bible is the word of God, in my opinion, is abhorrent, essentially just because it was made by committee when Constantine was turning Christianity into the official religion of Rome.
Mhm.
So he called in all these Catholic, because that was the only version of Christianity at the time, priests and knowers to go to Nicaea, which is in modern day Turkey. At that time, it would have been considered Asia Minor. And they would have went there and had a council. This is very close to modern day Byzantium, where he made his side of the empire. And that's when the empire split into two sides. But at the Council of Nicaea, they compiled like the legitimate version of Christianity. And this caused rifts. Arianism, not Arianism in like the view of like the Nazis, but Arianism as a religion was another version of Christianity that came out of the Council of Nicaea because they didn't follow the exact version that the Roman Empire adopted. And it became heretical. It was also the version of Christianity that many of the German peoples would have viewed as like the proper way to follow the Christian beliefs until they inevitably came into Roman rule, or they supplanted Rome in their own areas and paid lip services to the popes later. So the Bible itself would have only been in Latin until the Reformation in the 1500s. And that was a big thing. The church did not want the average person being able to read the Bible. Most average people, unless they were gentry, would never have learned Latin. The only people that learned Latin were people in the Christian church at that time that were like monks, priests, and not even nuns usually knew more than a few words of Latin because they were meant to serve the community. It was only with the Reformation in the 1500s that the Bibles began being translated to local dialects, and even then, it was only in countries that became like Lutheran and other denominations of Christianity that broke away from the Catholic Church. Localized translations of the Bible before that were seen as heretical because then people would know these stories. They weren't meant to be known by the people. They were meant to be used by priests in church service, and that was it. Which right there is a red flag, is that the information is being gatekept by language. So as to definitive historical questions, you guys can ask me whatever you want, and I can give you more definite answers as to specific information you want.
Okay.
Well, we're glad to have you here, Ryan, because that's some great context. And yeah, I just wanted to add that in that time period, oracles, prophets, like religious leaders, they were
Oh,
often involved in drug use to access that altered state and divine inspiration. So there was like Socrates, Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, they were all known to do this in that time period. So just wanted
yes.
to kind of, you know,
Socrates was just a philosopher, a thinker, and he just questioned everybody about everything. But no, if you're gonna like the Pythia, especially, which was sort of the main oracle of the ancient Greek world at in Greece, and everyone from the Greek world would have went to consult the Pythia for prophecy. Basically, she's the one that famously said that if for Greece to keep its independence and for the Spartans to beat the Persians, one of the Spartan kings must die or they would be subjugated by Persia. She was known to basically live in a cave beneath the temple of Apollo. And this cave had fumes coming up from like geothermal stuff underground. And she was always breathing that in. And that they were said that in the cave is where she heard Apollo. And then she would only come up to give her prophecy. And it's quite clear that the vapors in the cave may have been what was actually changing her state of consciousness. And shamanism, especially, they use drugs of all sorts to commune with their spiritual entities. And even today, neo shamans and tribes in the Amazon, they use things like ayahuasca and mushrooms to do the same thing. So yes, it was a very common view in the ancient world.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And
the
Galen
other,
actually was very much he talked about or he had a in his in the translation something that they called the Deathbringer or the Black Death formula, which was a multi-drug component, but it had an antidote. So they would basically poison you, put you to death, and then there would be a rebirth of the antidote. And this was kind of a process. And I think that's where part of the Christ meaning came from too. It was like a root, Greek root, creo, which apply the drugs to your eyes so that they may open, was one of the translations. And at that time, they used something that was called the purple. And then religious leaders and people of the occult that had were known to have high knowledge would have purple stained lips and purple on their fingertips and that was a sign that they were highly knowledgeable.
well, purple in the ancient world was also just seen as a nobility color. So if
Hmm.
you had purple on you, because purple dye, for instance, came from a very specific shell that was only native to a very small portion of the Mediterranean and was hard to make. So like when you refer to the emperor in ancient Rome, you'd say they are in the purple. So purple is a very important
Hmm.
sort of color even in the ancient world. But another point that I forgot to make earlier before I took questions is that human trafficking and things like that in the ancient world is something ubiquitous. Nobody would have questioned if you had a slave with you at all times because slavery was not seen in the same context as today. So moving humans for ritualistic things like this would not have even drawn an eye to an ancient person because humans are not would have just been being moved as slaves all over the place. I mean,
That's a great point. Yeah.
slavery in the ancient world was you even even the group peoples we think of in the ancient world as enlightened, like the Athenians or the Romans, they were they only worked because of slave labor. The Spartans had an entire caste of slaves they called helots, and they would often go to war with their helots to just keep them subjugated. This was not kind of this is a completely alien view to a modern person. But basically, if you lost a war in the ancient world, half your population was going to be enslaved by who won that war. And that
Yeah.
happened with the Roman conquest. That's why there were so many people in Rome that had to work for their freedom. Because getting out of slavery was actually fairly easily in comparison to like 1800 slavery in the ancient world. It didn't diminish its evils, but it was like most of our Roman court documents are about a woman who was pregnant when she was freed. If she was pregnant when she was freed, the baby would be freed. If she had the baby and then was freed, the baby was still a slave.
Back then, something that it will be good to get some facts around was there was a term called nanos that was referred to as an underage boy, and they were actually used to give the antidote. So there was a medicated bandage that was wrapped around, I won't say which parts, and the role was to provide because their body was providing the antidote, um, which they considered a balancing drug at that time. And there was so a lot of the history is now being looked at that the apostles were really young. They were young boys at that time around. So
Most, yeah, most likely. Again, another thing we have to look at is the ancient view of basically sexuality. Almost every person in the ancient world, by our standards today, would have been bisexual. Um, Male on male relationships and what female on female relationships were just part of daily life. There, the church in the Middle Ages is what really turned the idea of heterosexual relationships being needed as a means of control, essentially, to be a thing. It was never in the ancient world. I mean, there's the jokes and memes all about Athenians all being into like gay orgies and things, but that was all of the ancient world. The modern idea of sexuality is a post-Christian belief, essentially. The Christianity is still around and still demonizes these things, but modern sexuality is not very far off from ancient sexuality. And there was even kind of the idea of having a patron in the ancient world usually meant that you were sleeping with that person or your children were sleeping with that person, because you'd have patronage relationships where like a rich person would take a lower class but still free and well off person into their house as sort of a and they'd advise them in business and help them with their connections. It is a super predatory thing. It reminds you a lot about Epstein and his sort of cabal of evil people. But in the ancient world, that was standard practice, and it was what made their society work. I'm not advocating for or against it, but the idea of same-sex relations and sort of pedophilia in the ancient world wasn't really that big of a thing, especially because most women were having children at like the age of 14 anyway, because life expectancies in the ancient world, if you became older than like you could be considered an old man at like in your late 30s in the ancient world, because most people did not live long lives.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know we got to get going on this, but I just wanted to ask you, Ryan, did you know about a group called the Medusa? They were women that used these drug-laced arrows for hunting and ritual purposes, but they would actually capture men, and then they would drug induce them for their sexual. So there was it's something that I've just actually recently heard of.
Yes, there were a lot of cults in the ancient world, and cults to heroes, cults to people like Medusa, because Medusa, even though like she was, and Gorgons especially, because she was actually one of three Gorgons. It's usually when there's like an ancient monster, there's three of them of some type, and we hear about like the heroes slaying one of them in the myths we still have. Because one of the things we need to remember is we only have like maybe 10% of everything that was from that time, from those ancient eras, mostly due to the fact that a lot of it was oral and a lot of it was, if it was written down, it was, how do I put this without sounding, uh, if it was written down, it was lost due to the fact that it was written down on early papers, which did not last long once society collapsed. And as people were conquered and things, they would have basically prosecuted out the idea of um, old culture as a failure thing. And the idea of adopting the culture of your conquerors as a means of ingratiating yourself with your new leadership was very important. And so there was a need for this kind of a lot of knowledge to be lost from those people's perspective, because if it wasn't, there would then be rebellion against this new order.
Interesting. The one thing before we start, guys, I just the area that I think that we want to ask some questions around, because I think it's will give us the most amount of knowledge around this, was Jesus' arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, if I've
Mhm.
said that right. It's called the agony in the garden, which I questioned, why was it called the agony? And from what I understand is that it was always about drug use, and they were using venoms and specific multi drugs and then they'd have a balancing drug or an antidote to come back from that. And a Roman soldier found Jesus with a naked boy in a public park at 4 a.m. in the morning, is what the story is. So it'd be interesting to hear more about that, and maybe that'll give us some context to what's going on.
And
Mhm.
actually, to go off on a slight aside about just drug use in the ancient world, the Eleusinian Mysteries, which was one of the most famous sort of religious rites in the ancient world, was sort of a collection of thinkers, politicians, church, well, not church like Christian church, but like religious officials that would all go to Eleusis in Greece. And it's considered the mysteries because only the people that went sort of knew what was going on. And it was highly indicated that the people there took drugs and basically conducted secret rituals for days in order to, um, I guess, appease the gods and build relationships to keep the society in order.
Mm.
That's yeah, that's very, very interesting. You know, I also came across, and I will say this, at the time when all of this was being planned, you know, I link the early Roman holiday Saturnalia to Christianity, because of the fact that also some of this spurned off, I believe, the word Satan also is associated with that, not just a poser of the church like some of the modern day Satanists like to say, but I believe it's also associated with Enlil and also the actor of which I attributed. I always like to attribute it to Ben Kingsley's character, the Mandarin from Iron Man 3, the not the comic version, but the movie version. But the I was associated that because of the acting involved in this to subvert away from what was going on in the background, especially if a high crime was being committed. There is also, from what I understand, there's also like in nations like Peru, they like to promote like some of the channeling and the ayahuasca and all this other stuff going on in order to subvert people's eyes away from some of the very same things that are going on in the background with drug use and everything and trafficking and a lot of the stuff that goes on there. This is what I've heard over the years with this. If anybody wishes to substantiate that, please comment below this. But also one question also for you, Ryan, from your information, from historical texts, what did they say the description of the actual Jesus was versus like the Edgar Cayce version?
I mean, there is sort of no real historical view thing about him. He, apart from like Christian religious texts, he was just a person. He wasn't anything special to the most of the people around him that weren't his followers.
Hmm.
Most likely, he would have looked like everyone else in the region. I mean, based on our archaeological view of, they have built like what they believe to be him, and he looked like a person of Eastern Mediterranean Judea stock. He would have looked like a Near Eastern, Middle Eastern man.
Hmm.
We don't have, there's nothing special about what he looks like. Now, to talk about Saturnalia for a second, Saturnalia was the Roman festival to Saturn, which
Hmm.
we know as Enlil. And Christmas was put there in the calendar as a means of sort of co-opting Saturnalia into Christianity, because Saturnalia was sort of the winter solstice celebration. And the winter solstice was amazingly important in the ancient world, just as like a period of like, this is the heart of winter, and this is where our this is when we need to like begin taking stock of our things. This is when we need to have our big blowout before the cold of winter comes in. And Christmas and Saturnalia, even for the beginning of it, would, even up until like almost pre-modern eras, the raucous party was not any different than the Roman Saturnalia celebrations. It's only once you get into the early modern era that Christmas basically takes on the views of Christmas that it has today as being a more family oriented celebration. Even early American writers talk about not letting your children and servants run too far a flock around the winter solstice, because raucous Christmas and Saturnalia style celebration was the name of Christmas, basically, until the early modern era.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, though I also know that Odin and his eight-legged horse, and also the builders of the Bifrost, the dwarves, eventually morphed into Santa and his elves and his
Yes,
reindeer too.
Yes.
So
because
yeah.
Odin has the famous wild hunt, which happens around the winter solstice in Norse mythology, and it's an annual thing. Odin and his people fly through the night sky. He's on Sleipnir. Some of his other men are on different beasts, and yes, that Odin is the direct inspiration. Odin mixed with Saint Nicholas, is what gets us to modern Santa. They conveniently leave Odin out when they explain the story, but Odin is very important to the Santa belief.
Very integral to
Yeah,
it.
true.
Yeah.
He is
So,
Santa. And we have a show
yes,
about that if anybody wants to go back and take a look at that.
yeah,
Yeah,
that was very interesting. Yeah.
he's the original Sky Rider, so that's where the idea of somebody who flies around the planet during this dark time of the year comes from. Yes.
hmm Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, as we're talking about this, I've noticed the energy building towards this. It took a minute for it to get up to this point here. So
Who's with
to
us today, Chris? And who's
there's
around?
actually a multitude. Hang on, there's one distraction in the way. Out. Okay. Uh, Odin I know is around, uh, but there's also another party interested in speaking, but I don't particularly trust that particular party. Okay. Um, I know we filmed a Q&A yesterday for the lifting. I know Edgar Cayce said he wanted to talk briefly on something, but Odin, I believe, is going to take the grand majority of this. So, let me see. Okay. Okay, there went the energy. Okay, there we go. I was making sure that it was proper for this. Okay. Hmm. 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 All right. There's also another group communicating with me via uh, uh, another form of telepathy here, basically saying that can you give one word response for that, please? If I could get one answer from you before I move forward. Uh, oh, okay. Usually let me go for it. Okay. All right. So, wow, I'm getting both pressure and high energy. So we're getting both the and the up. So true benevolent Odin, please come through as of this moment. Oop, nope, I didn't say you. Good. Odin only. Man, wow. All right. A lot of interference got here, folks. So yes, excuse the interference. This is a mix of energies. It's not who completely you think that it is. Also, the shallowing of the channeling that went on at that time, the information being received by said actor. What was not being said was that particular channel was always the scheduled sacrifice on behalf of the beginning of this religion. Always was to be killed by that of the Roman Empire. This then was needed for more of Enlil's energy to come through at the time. He shallowed or channeled through this person, and so that he could walk around in that form. It's very much like, how can I put it? Just basically any channeling that goes on or possession that goes on from any form of demigod or an in-between medium, someone utilizing the mediumship. this also would have been the whole the son is the father is the son argument. Now, to what took place then? Yes, there was trafficking back then. This is why there is controversy surrounding also the whole Mary Magdalene story and the Jesus bloodline. Did those events occur of the Da Vinci Code in this? Yes and no. Because of the fact, yes, there was an actor. Yes, there was another, you would say actress. She was more of a slave. This is why they attribute to her to being a whore later on. People attribute this as, oh, because they didn't put a woman in a position of power. They were taking the position of power. The church was taking that position of power away. Yes, I can agree. But at the same time, this was something they made upon layer upon layer upon layer, as you said, 400 years later, with the creating of some stories of the Bible. Yes, this was integrated later. Da Vinci, as he was also creating aspects of his codes that popped up later on. This also associates with myself because he was of the dwarven civilization, the world of wheels, whereas he came up with different mathematical coding integrated into the Bible. This was also some of the other factions' doings as well. The mathematical coding is the reason I am showing him this other. He sees in his mind a computer prompting, whereas there's a mathematical coding very similar to your Matrix movies because I was showing him aspects of the Bible code in there. They've now associated this with your Matrix movies and such in a loose way. But that mathematical coding then became integrated the set of timelines by which then certain ET groups could then operate. How can I put this? Or plan out their timeline, or there's interference, excuse, on his mind. I will reiterate. This was how a timeline was being forged within that book. It is not necessarily a holy book. It is more of a mathematical algorithm by which your Hollywood operates their companies and studios contracts. I will explain. Earlier in the past few days, your celebrity Michael Jackson came to him and was showing him, leading him to videos talking about this algorithm that only the people above the silence basically would be able to be free of that coding. This coding came from these other demigods and ET groups. They showed Baal, but this was actually Enlil, utilizing the same coding on your Hollywood within the contractual agreements that your Michael Jackson was bound into at that time. He said he was showing this, like he said in his previous channel, it was arcing across time. This is what he meant. Now, back to your current subject. Within that time frame, yes, there were children that were being trafficked. Your apostles, quote unquote, were children at the time of the said events. Later on in history, your Peter and Paul got it in their mind to go after some of these dark things in history. You could say it's a form of witchery going after. It was more in, you would say, Nero's time, where they were chasing one by the name of Simon Magus. You called him Orion Magician. There's more of an apt term for somebody like that, but some of the stories people consider to be fan fiction out there showed that they cut him up into pieces and burned his body. And Nero was very upset about this because Simon Magus was the court wizard. There were negative court wizards and there was positive court wizards. But starting within the Jesus time frame, the children that were being seen were drained of what you call it now adrenochrome. It's the oxidized adrenaline. This gave connections to spirit, quote unquote. Your modern day China does something similar by not only oppressing the Uyghurs, but there's also another thing where they drain certain chemicals out of people that are more fit and give them to they're more slovenly and or degenerative elite. But within this, the children have the purest connection to this. Your vampires connect into this because this particular ET race, with its viral contagion, this was very, very similar, where it's a derivative of. It's not exactly the same. There is a connection there, where then you constantly need more and more of it, and you age rapidly when you do not get it. Your Hollywood has integrated this in. This is effectively a form of the vampiric contagion, by which then if someone is given this, it will temporarily cure anything they have, and then they will become very degenerated after this. And even their own organs will be eaten by their own immune system. With this, it's an extreme double-edged sword. It is all of course, it stretches across time into your satanic garbage that happens in Hollywood. But at that time, what they would do is, like you said, the Bjorn, the antidote. They would not only extract that, but they would extract the adrenochrome out of the kidneys. When this happened, or the adrenochrome, excuse me, when this took place, the child's energy was then given to more reptilian sources. Then the byproduct from that sacrifice then was this continuance of life for some of those elite, the vampiric nature. You saw this in one of your Trek episodes, where the child was strapped to the chair and then drained to save the entirety of a society. This is essentially what was being said, the story that was being said. Now, this was actually started in that particular area in that way. But further back in time, there were some druidic groups that were doing this way with basically the blood of the one you call Cornunus, the horned god. This particular being is a son of my bastard son, and he is more of a vampiric horned entity that is more vampiric in nature. And he started druidic groups that would then worship him as the horned god. People misassociate him with nature. He is nothing of the sort. He just took on the style, let's just say, and he is a bit, what you say, gross. This is that particular connection. And any of the bowls and or chalices that show his image on them would then be that by which that would have the blood filled within. I know you wished to keep the time short, so I will go into question.
Oh, great. So maybe you could and I'll give Ryan a chance to ask a question too, and Joanna, uh the the park, or the place where Jesus was found. What was going on there? Why do they call it the agony of and Garden of Jesus? And a
Hmm.
Roman soldier found a naked boy. So we're just trying to understand that part of history, because it seems to
Hmm.
be shrouded in mystery.
Hmm. Yes, that particular event, that was exactly what I was talking about before.
Mm.
They gave these things to the drug to various people they wished to keep alive for that time frame, or keep as a slave, kind of like your Ketracel White is to in your Star Trek lore to the Jem'Hadar. It's the same thing. Something they need to continue on being the way they are. Now, in that particular sequence, I'm showing him this one sequence where he's kneeling in the garden and these Roman soldiers approach him. I think you can kind of guess what was going on there with this, but with the whole thing, Father, why have you forsaken me? A story that was added in much, much later. And anything that individual would have been saying at this time with this particular high, it would not have been that coherent. Uh, and it would have been more of a babbling, or your New Age groups call it the soul speak, the babbling, the blah, 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 type sound. It would not have been coherent. And that's exactly what was happening. And this particular chemical is being also extracted during different sexual acts. The Roman centurions, or the Roman guards, excuse me, that approached. then found this particular scene. This is where this story originates.
Okay. Anyone else have a follow-up question to that? Maybe I'll ask the this question to you, Odin, is so there was a group of the in Greek mythology known as the muses that were a group of nine sister goddesses. They embodied the arts and sciences and literature at the time, and they were supposed to be considered daughters of Zeus and Nes I can't recall her name. So, but I'm wondering how that all relates to this because it was very much a cult that was followed around that time and seemed to have really influenced a lot of the Greek scholars.
Hmm. Yes, you are looking at the same cultish group that the one you call the witch actually formed. This embodying different ideas and different embodying different ways of conducting themselves within the arts, giving a bit of a aphrodisiac to those that would boost certain creativity for a time, but then it was vampired off of. This is also something that was presented in your DS9 later than where you are in the series, of a vampiric person that would siphon off of people's creativity and then make it so they were creatively inepted or impotent at that point. They would also drain people's sexuality as well and make them more impotent at that time. This is a form of vampirism that also stretches to when your Vril channeled by Maria Orsic channeled the different Aldebaran reptilians and such during Hitler's time frame. And so this links directly to that. This is why these muses embodied the the different concepts because that is what they were draining from somebody. Just like you have medical where they specialize in a different area, the witch decided to embody different young ladies within this cult, with not only being more of an aged vampire herself, but with the different ideas. Oh, I embody this, I embody that. That's more of an abomination, but they would then go after that particular idea as a form of turning it into a in the blood of the person that was sacrificed. They would not only draw the energy, but they would imbue it in. It would be imbued into the blood. Therefore, they were able to take on that bit of energy and convert it into something that they could use. They figured they would dice it up. She, in her infinite lust, decided that it was smart to dice it up into ideas. One could say it was a bit of evil genius on her part if she wasn't so damn disgusting. This is exactly where that came from. The unwitting victims were essentially victims to vampires at that time in history.
Hmm. Um, what do you know about the word Christ? We wanted to kind of confirm that around with the Greek language, and was Jesus just given that name afterwards to fit into the whole Christianity story?
Mm. Yes, the it was essentially he saw it as meant the anointed. Yes, but later on, yes, that was the name of the of basically were drugs, and this is why he cannot find this on the internet now, because this is essentially basically Jesus, the drug by which then everyone gives away their free will to that of a savior. You see, as well as what was aforementioned. The actual name of the person wasn't Jesus the Christ. This, or your Christ consciousness, or anything that you try to attribute to your oversoul, which is not recommended. This person, the person Jesus Christ, did not actually exist. The person that was born at that time was one of many of the people that existed in that land, and he was the actor then by which, or the person by which then went around and planned the religion out. One of the henchmen. Did Enlil channel through him and shall go through him and make himself look like himself then? Yeah, but Enlil still would have looked like one of the people of that area. So to show him as this 6 foot tall white person did not exactly fit, even though I myself would appear as a Scandinavian. Um, Enlil was only part of that. He was still reflected the darker skin of people of that area. He was not exactly my genetic child. He was more that of Freya and Alalulu. So this is not, he would not be my genetic spawn, let's just say. So this, I know others had questions as well.
Well, the whole story, I think, is a conversation in general. It's a bigger conversation dealing with the advent of legend. Because he's not basically what you're basically saying is that throughout time, either by circumstance, happenstance, or planned, which you're saying this was absolutely planned.
Yes.
That there was going to be a creation of a religion
Yes.
that would occur. That I'm thinking that the hopes were it was going to be the dominant and primary religion that sprung up that most
To be more
all,
controlled, yes.
right, that most all Earth would adopt,
Yes,
throughout time.
And you have your New World religion. Rome tried to create this. They took it from, you would say, basically when Pharaoh Akhenaten came up with the one God type. Who do you think was trying to get him to do this as well? You call him Yahweh, Enlil, God of the Old Testament.
Right.
But same being doing this. As you move on, Caesar burns the Library of Alexandria, takes all the information, and then takes it back to what now is regurgitated into the Vatican Library. Now, fast forward to now, what are they trying to do? Turn everything back into that because it is now reflecting what it's basically like what they left off, pretty much. New Age didn't work, so therefore they figured they would return it to an older template.
Which, as we said, there was no accident at all that the new Pope was the American Pope.
Exactly.
To go along with the American presidents, to go along who was the ascendants in power. So we've said that before, but in this creation, let's call it, in this creation of a religion story, then basically it's just picking a person who's there to play a role, because he wasn't the only one at that time.
They just picked a person.
Spouting off different belief system, because there was the whole Essenes.
Yes.
All of them were kind of behind the scene, which there is a correlation between Jesus and the Essenes, right? As far as a thought process.
That individual was part of that group, yes.
So basically what you're talking about and what we've talked about before that has happened throughout time is the pruning of the historical dialogue in order to create something. So yes, did certain events occur? Yes. Was a person, spouting out a different thought process? Yes. But he wasn't the only one, but he was then plucked out of that group to kind of spring around a story, which then multiple hundred years later, the Council of Nicaea took it upon themselves to actually really coalesce the story.
Yes.
Right? And then to bring it further into being and to start spreading the good word around the world, let's say. So I find it interesting because, again, as what we were...
Also, what you spoke about the Great Pope as well was integrated into that story.
Right. So, again, speaking on, utilizing good things. Okay, so hiding within it. And if everyone can't understand, again, what was picked up about the pedophilia in the church, the basis of some of the nastiness that has been hiding in the church has been there since its inception. And I think it's really...
The wolf in sheep's clothing, like you saw in the National Cathedral, that's exactly what was meant.
Right.
This is why somebody wanted to bring your attention to it, and there's the wolf in sheep's clothing, but they wanted no details or context behind it.
So, and again, and so from what what Ryan was saying about how certain mannerisms and ways of being that were accepted in society were becoming less desirable in society. And so you have, again, how are we going to conduct our business with our, looshing, with our, what we have to give to our masters, with all of that? How are we going to do it? And so the goal is to formulate a religion that looks one way on the outside, but underneath it is carrying on certain doctrine and certain ways of being that have been there for many, many, many years.
Just like what he saw about the Michael Jackson material, it wasn't ever about the money. It was about a devotion to a demigod. That's what your Hollywood is based off of.
Exactly. So again, what's really hard, because again, you know how I am, we've got to give context, because again, what happened is good things were co-opted. There is nothing wrong with groups of people gathering, and good fellowship and good things can be done with groups. Be it, and so what was happening though is a domination and control happened to create things to allow an underbelly of nasty evil underneath it on the surface, based upon utilizing very good and decent people. Because again, now great fellowships within people getting together, be it under a faith-based or whatever, beautiful things can happen. So I think for me, it's an important, because it makes sense now for the pedophilia. It makes sense, some of these things in the human trafficking that we just can't seem to stop. It makes sense if you add in that there's a historical and galactic precedent of this type of nasty behavior happening.
Just like the space abductions that go on, your alien abductions, your Draco taking people into space, the soul trade, take your pick.
Right. And so it is an unfortunately dirty, nasty, festering wound that as people begin to understand some of the bigger picture behind it, it can transform. One of the things even about Christmas time, okay, whatever. I'm sorry, great, your Father Christmas, don't care. I prefer the Santa Claus look. I prefer, that it be, about caring and doing your best to bring together family, all the positiveness about it.
But you don't want more Christ. That's what that translates to.
True. But again, I can make the word whatever I want to make the word mean to me. And so that's the great thing about transforming something. And so again, what we have to do is we have to understand what has happened, and then we give way to some of the doctrine that actually is negative and controlling, and then in its place let something blossom out of it that is benevolent fellowship, benevolent unity, benevolent ways of being. And so it is a transforming process that can be done, that can take away those things that need to be known. And, basically, again, if you really understood that, some of this trafficking and tunneling is done to cathedrals and to places of worship and to all of these good places where this stuff happens underneath and everything, you would want it to stop.
Yes.
And that's what you need to know.
Just like Michael Jackson told him in Channel, where pieces of a French chateau were taken, where that very thing was going on, and he was placed within Neverland Ranch as well, with the same ideal in place. This is what was going on. Again, stretching across history. This is exactly it. Or your London Bridge in your like Havasu City, which was also there was also a different bridge on site that was built on top of. So that was actually an altar to another demigod. So you see how this keeps rolling along. This isn't just one, it's a one concept, but there's multiple heads to this snake. So is there any other questions? Ryan?
Yeah, I have one I would mind asking you is so the co-opting of all of this was, we understand, is definitely about control. but is it also about worship? And I want to ask you we know that Enlil's title was Lord of Command of Midgard. Um, is the Lord, there's a lot of worship to the Lord. Is that directly passing that worship to him?
You are 100% correct, Bjorn, because of the fact that he was anointed the Lord High Commander of the Earth at the time, and it shortened to the Lord. Uh, and this was one of my one of my mistakes, uh, making sure that he had that much power at the time. I thought he could be trusted more than he could at the time, just like in the Loki material. I thought that he was a more trusted advisor, trusted stepson type of person. And long before, yes, did he have a better standing and was he a better person? Yes. But then he began to degenerate. And this wasn't just like in your Lucifer material. They make it sound quick. This was gradual, like the frog boiling in the pot kind of thing. This was to his own ambitions and to his own means and ends. And yes, was he influenced also by the Orions? Yes, but there was some susceptibility there to cause not just mischief, but darkness as well. If it was just about mischief, nobody would probably care. If it was just about a Pan-like figure in history, probably nobody would care. They would just be annoyed. But we remember the person he was long before the context by which you are seeing him now. So this is who we know. This is who we see. And this is who we hope can be restored one of these days. So, um, Uh, I know, anybody else have a question? Hmm? Hmm?
No.
Ryan?
I'm good.
Oh, all right. So, this, okay, I'm starting to stammer because there is an ill connection here. Um, excuse, who is pushing? Hmm. Ah, your, sleeping prophet, which wishes to leave a message. So, only for a short time, friend.
Thank you, Odin.
Mhm. Yes. Hmm. I do wish to say that the one message I wish to say was, yes, was I getting some of my ill messages from some of the Ra in history, which were then associated with Enlil and also Marduk as well, which would be Ra. Also uses the symbol of the bee in your time frame as well. Uh, yeah, for one of the demigod cults as well. Oh, yes. This I was seeing, and I know people have reported me saying that it was under the reign of Tiberius. Um, and did I misjudge and see certain things? Did I see things that were implanted in the ether versus that of reality? Yes. All the medical information that I've spoken to you before in your Q&A, yes, alchemic, all of it, true. But then they're also implanted in the timelines are what you would see as booby traps or visual booby traps by which then a remote viewer would look back and actually see a thing. And they are genuinely seeing a thing, but they're not looking past the illusion layer. Yes, there was a reptilian esque figure in charge at that time as well. In the biblical period, there was also he saw basically uh, Moloch associated with this. Um, he is a separate demigod that demands sacrificial everything. He basically is like the proverbial predator of that time, whereas he would have bones on display like the fictional character kind of thing, trophies. He's associated more like he's unfortunately integrated into some of your mountain cultures and things like that in your Appalachia. No, he's pretty gross. But the figure of which I'm talking about, the pretty person that Tiberius said he was the prettiest man he'd ever seen. He was no, he was before that. But it was my error by which then I saw the other material. I now most detached because there is you're starting to get some tumultuous energies to his nervous and circulatory system. So I if you wish to talk to me further in some other time frame, I will be happy to talk to you. Then this is the reason I'm not sounding correct at this time. So I thank you for allowing me to give my 2 cents. Just know that I was not discerning correctly. Sometimes I was also a man that was also trying to figure out what he was looking at. Some things came in, some things were more yield based. So I thank you. Oh, all right. Yeah, I was starting to get a big pressure there. I could feel it pressing on my chest a little bit there. So
Yeah, I
he
just want
said,
to
no.
say to the audience that that was Edgar Cayce that
Mhm,
was channeled just after Odin, after I thanked him for joining.
mhm. Yes, he couldn't hold the connection very well. That's why he was sounding back and forth. At some point, we can ask him questions about demigods and things of that nature. But I think that'd be a good show at some point. But yeah, he was on a Q&A of ours yesterday as well, where he went in and there was a conga line of different celebrities that came through. He was just one of them. I figured it would be Odin today on this to talk about this subject more so than anybody else. But normally I don't like doing twofers like that because it becomes the line becomes unstable, or a conga line of them become unstable after a while, and the energies start to blend, and it's actually unsafe to do that. So any channelers deciding they're going to go one right after another, please don't. That's my fork and light socket moment there. Please do not follow suit. I'm just saying that as a disclaimer right now. It can destabilize, and you don't know what you're getting after a while. Do one at a time. That's for safety reasons. So I don't know if anybody has anything else to add before we take.
I just want to say I'm glad that Ryan joined us today and gave
Yeah,
his deep knowledge on the real history and archaeology. So thanks, Ryan, for joining us.
It was a pleasure. I am being told to tell the story that the ancients had to use to ingratiate Christianity into with like the common people.
Mhm.
Um, so uh, I guess Odin has come over here to where I am now, which is strange because I'm in a car. But he wants me to talk about this. It's basically a myth that then after a while the church kind of stopped using because it wasn't really applicable anymore. But when the Romans first adopted Christianity, they had to make a way to explain the souls of all the people that worshipped religions before Christianity, um, and what would happen with them. To basically, because ancestor worship was a major component of like household religion back in those days. Um, and to get around this hurdle, they basically created a story where Jesus went to the underworld and parlayed with Hades to free the souls of good people so that they could go to heaven, to like Christian heaven. And the the whole point that the story basically leads to is that for these people to have adopted Christianity so readily, they needed a way to explain why all their ancestors were one wrong and two um, what would happen to them because they were very important aspects of these people's everyday lives. You got to think about it this way. A lot of the people that were in Roman power and stuff, they would have claimed descendancy from Greek heroes of myth and legend or ancient other mythological figures. So the idea that these ancient heroes would have been cast into hell forever for not following this religion was abhorrent to them. And so they had to actually like pivot to make a story to ingratiate this new religion in a way that worked for them.
Mhm.
And it was, even at the time, they were kind of like, well, I don't see this guy handling much against Hades. And it was kind of the first big blow Christianity ever took in its credibility. And Odin's basically telling me to, yeah, just put it out there so that people can be like, oh yeah, this is all bullshit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That particular part of the story. Yeah. Now that you're saying it, that did remind me. That's why I was nodding. It's kind of like with the 12, kind of like the 12 labors, or kind of like a lot of the Greek myths that are out there. Yeah. So that's actually very interesting. I'd actually forgotten that one. So it's good he brought that actually up, because it basically shows how much bullshit that actually is. If Odin's basically saying, "Yeah, we didn't actually do that," that's actually very telling right there. So that's good he brought that up, because he saw that I was probably getting fried there a little bit, so he went over to you. So that's uh, I thought that was
It's
actually
like
quite.
saying Jesus had a crap game with Satan and won.
Yes, like the Jesus in the
A
cave
little
where
gambling down there.
yeah, basically, like people like to show images of him arm wrestling Satan, or that story from the Bible where he's actually looking at like he talks to Satan in a cave, that whole story. So yeah, where it's really basically a reflection of himself. I could see that story being, and I feel that is more of, I'm getting it downloaded. That is more of the Enlil and the actor kind of fusing and channeling. That's more the channeling story right there. So but the rest of it, that's bullshit. So yeah, that I completely agree there. I don't know if anybody has anything else to add before we take this out today. Mm,
No, I just want to say thanks everyone for joining us and watching this on the GIC.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, this was interesting. And there has been a bit of, I'll say pre-blowback that has led up to this. Nothing like the vampire episode, folks. That was ugly. This one was at least manageable. So I was actually kind of worried about this, but in the end, that the worry was more the hype than anything else. So thank you everybody for watching this episode of GIC. We much appreciate this. You're now seeing this on the GIC YouTube, which you can thank Bjorn Ragnarson there for really getting all the graphics in order. You'll see all the graphics he made for it. Wonderful. Complete GIC is being completely revamped from this point forward. It's actually quite cool the way it's being done. So at this point, I now close this circle within true benevolence and no conflicting agendas as of this moment in time. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Mhm.